حياة القلب بالقرآن.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters. I hope you're all doing really well, inshallah ta'ala. Today's lecture is actually going to be moving on from the last lecture I did, which talks about how the word hadith or speech is presented in the Quran, and also a little bit about the history of hadith literature. So it's almost an introduction to the fiqh of hadith. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the current teaching of the Sunnah and hadith literature and kind of how that works. Because actually, whether we know it or realise it or we don't, the majority of us do follow a school of thought, or madhab in Arabic, somehow. Why? Because it supports our practice of Islam. It shouldn't be followed as a separate branch of Islam. It should be followed to support how we practice. So the schools, madahib, and scholars, ulama, are essential for us to be able to understand hadith literature and, of course, Quranic text, but today we're focusing on hadith literature. Now, sometimes people will follow a particular school of thought in a very rigid way, and this is called Taqleed. And Taqleed, I'm just giving you a little bit of the jargon right now, some of the important words that you need to know and remember. So Taqleed is when we reject or ridicule or label as incorrect a school of thought, a madhab, or a scholar in favour of following another. So it's a very dangerous thing, Taqleed. It doesn't mean that you can't follow one particular school and choose not to follow others. That's absolutely fine. But Taqleed is when we actually reject other schools of thought in favour for our own, and we label the schools or the scholars who are within those schools, or it might be a scholar who isn't necessarily in a particular school of thought, but is doing his or her own opinion on a certain matter. When we reject that and we ridicule that and we label that as haram, then we're going into quite dangerous territory, I'll be honest. So when we follow a school of thought, it's really important to do that in a fluid way and do it in a non-judgmental way, even if we might choose not to follow another school of thought, or we might disagree with a certain opinion that's been passed in another school of thought. Now, another term that I want to tell you about today is the term Ijtihad. Now, Ijtihad is probably a term that you've already heard, and it actually literally means independent reasoning. So in jurisprudence, in Islamic fiqh, it's when a mujtahid, or a person who practices or applies Ijtihad, uses her or his knowledge of one of the primary sources of Islamic law. So that could be the Quran or a Sahih Hadith, the practice of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they do that in order to work out a ruling or hukum in a case or a situation that is maybe something new that hasn't been addressed before, or it becomes necessary due to other reasons. Now, Ijtihad in itself is actually something that some of us, or actually a lot of us, will practice ourselves on a day-to-day basis with certain things without even realising that we're doing it. So this is called a personal ijtihad. So for example, when you go somewhere and you are not sure where the Kaaba is, where the Qibla is, to pray, and you have to make a decision based on the knowledge that you've got in front of you, and maybe doing the Qibla finder on your phone or getting a compass or something, you have to make a decision based on your knowledge that you have at that time, which direction to pray in. You are doing a kind of personal ijtihad when you're doing that. And we do the same in lots of other areas of our life. Now, that doesn't mean that we have the green light and go ahead to make rulings or hukum. These are only temporary personal ijtihad, which become necessary in certain situations. So ijtihad itself comes from the root word jahada, Jahada means when somebody is striving or they're exerting themselves, they're trying as hard as they possibly can. So when we put that in ijtihad within the Sharia or the Islamic law, it's practiced in more an academic context rather than through trying hard physically. So it doesn't mean that somebody's running around, although if you apply it to a physical context, if someone's running around and running a race or doing some type of sport where they are exerting themselves, they would be doing a jahada. They would be exerting themselves. But of course in Sharia this means in an academic or knowledge context. So the mujtahid, or the person who is making ijtihad, tries their best to find the correct solution to the case that's in front of them. And that is what the ulama essentially do. So what about the history of ijtihad? Where does it actually come from? Was it practiced at the time of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example? Now, there's a very famous, and actually is used as one of the roots of learning about the area of fiqh and the area of ijtihad or making rulings, where the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually sent Mu'adh as a judge, to Yemen. Now, it's a very famous hadith. Many of you will have heard this hadith. And he said to him when he was sending him to Yemen, how will you judge when the occasion of deciding a case arises? And Mu'adh replies, I will judge in accordance with Allah's book. So this is principle one. So when a scholar passes a ruling on something, principle number one is you go to the first primary text, which is the Quran. Then the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks Mu'adh, and what happens if you don't find guidance in Allah's book, in the Quran? So Mu'adh replies to him, I will do this in accordance with the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the second stage when you are passing some kind of hukum or ruling. The second thing that the ulama go to is what? It is the sunnah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks Mu'adh, so what happens if you don't find guidance in the sunnah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So Mu'adh said to the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and remember here the context, Mu'adh is going to go to Yemen to teach the new Muslims there. He's going as a teacher, as a guide, as a mentor to help the new Muslims. And he's going to be in a new context. It's not like he can get on the phone to the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and ask him something. So he's in a situation where he needs to be able to make decisions when new situations come up. So when the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks him about, okay, what if you don't find guidance in the Sunnah and in the Quran? Mu'adh says to him, I shall do my best to make an opinion and I will spare no pains. So I will do my utmost best to make an opinion. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam pats Mu'adh on the chest and said to him, praise be to Allah who helped the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to find a thing that pleases Allah. This is one of the foundation hadiths that is used to talk about the matter of ijtihad and how to make ijtihad, how the ulama will come to these decisions on particular rulings and situations. Now, the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually encouraged the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, the companions, and those after them were also encouraged to practice ijtihad and not be scared of making mistakes. Now, the reason why that they shouldn't fear making mistakes is because if they feared making mistakes, then they would have refused to make decisions, and then we would not end up with rulings. And there's a very famous hadith where the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when a ruler gives a decision, having tried his best to decide correctly, and he is right, he shall have a double reward. And when he gives a decision, so a ruling, having tried his best and he is incorrect or he is wrong, he shall have a single reward. So this actually encourages ijtihad because it emphasizes that even when a scholar makes a mistake, even when a scholar might be wrong, then he will still get rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of the matter is whether it's right, he's right or whether he's wrong, as long as he's put his complete self into that. And this is a spiritual matter. The effort that he or she has made is a spiritual matter, and that is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that will be decided on the day of judgment. It is part of al-ghaib. It's not the unseen. This is something that we cannot see. We don't know about that. So ijtihad was encouraged by the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the companions, and it was also encouraged to the following generations after this. The Quran tells us in Surah 16 verse 44, we sent them with clear signs. We have sent down to you the message so that you can explain clearly to men what is sent for them, and that they may give thought. Now, Qutb, radiallahu anh, in his tafsir, thinks or suggests that when the Quran is asking, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking people to reflect on the Quran, it's calling on people to reflect and use their reason. In other words, to perform ijtihad where needed. So the ulama, therefore, will perform ijtihad where needed. Because, of course, we know that the sunnah ends when the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam dies, but that doesn't mean that there are no new situations that were not relevant at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. There are new contexts, new situations, new problems faced by society that need to be dealt with by the ulama, by the scholars, and need new solutions, even up until this day. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides the ulama, guides the scholars to make the best of decisions, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and reward them for their efforts in their ijtihad and in their rulings. I also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide our hearts to ensure that we don't be drawn into the narrative of negativity towards the ulama, and don't fall into the trap of the shaitan where we are making a fitna within the ummah. So for now, from me, Ustadha Amina Blake, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
جدد حياة القلب بالقرآن.